All right, hi guys. So welcome to video 8. I want to talk about a topic tonight that I learned a ton about when I was first learning keto. One of my keto celebrity mentors would be Healthful Pursuit. She is amazing, Leanne Vogel. She's amazing. She's got a podcast and books out and all that stuff. And she has a long story of health issues and stomach problems and eating disorders well before she ever found keto. And so I was really started paying attention to my own eating patterns with emotions and keto through probably the last 2 months of my experience. And so, but it's very difficult because I think there's a lot of stigma around emotion and food, especially for women, especially if you learned it early in life like I did. And there's two different things. There's the very, very narrow category of eating disorders, right? And that would be anorexia and bulimia. Anorexia being not eating at all and starving yourself, and bulimia being binging and then purging, right? So there's those two things, and a lot of us are like, oh, well, we don't identify with that, so that doesn't make any sense to us. But then there's disordered eating behaviors, which are not diagnosable, but they're definitely patterns that are unhealthy, right? Just because it's undiagnosed doesn't mean it's an unhealthy pattern. And I learned a ton about this when I going through my own journey, not just through keto, but through years and years and years of learning to eat clean and assessing how I was using food to cope emotionally. I loved carbs and alcohol and caffeine when I'm really stressed. I feel like I'm either doing something good for my body. I always felt like, oh, well, I need the extra energy, so I need the caffeine. Or, oh, I need to unwind, so I need the alcohol. And a lot of that pattern was happening when I was still living in DC, right? So a lot of other people were doing the same thing, and a lot of other people who were your peers suffering the same way you were in stress, and all doing the same thing. So no one thinks anyone's doing anything wrong, right? So I learned this behavior. And it wasn't until later I was like, wow, food is a really big emotional crutch for me. And the first time I think I really opened my eyes to that was when I was really motivated to get off anxiety medication. I was super anxious and depressed, and I didn't want to take medication anymore. So I was really motivated at the time to learn a lot about nutrition. And of course, I always talk about this book. I read my first book ever on food and nutrition called The Food Mood Solution. And it taught me about what your brain needs nutritionally to function well, and how neurotransmitters are literally something you can impact with your food. So like omega-3s and vitamin D and vitamin B and all these things you always hear about what you need to consume, but actually really do matter when it comes to mental health. So when I first started playing with that, I went and switched to clean eating. And then from there I was like, hurting or when I'm suffering. And I also really like carbs when I'm celebrating and I'm happy, right? So I'm a carb who admit it out loud. I love carbs all the time. Maybe I learned it's chicken or the egg. My love for carbs could have started very early in life because it was behavior that I learned and therefore ended up exacerbating my PCOS. Or if anyone knew, this would be great, how we get PCOS. If I was genetically given PCOS and therefore have always been more sensitive to carbs, then therefore I actually don't metabolize carbs the same way everybody else does, and I want carbs more than everybody else. Either way, I am a carb addict, whether genetically or, nature or nurture. I'm a carb addict, and I had to learn to undo that behavior. So either way, however you feel you're currently aligned, you can undo that carb addiction and really start to pull apart the food and nutrients for your body and where you feed yourself emotionally. So I actually I had a loose idea of what I mean when I'm talking about disordered eating patterns. So like eating in secret and then hiding the evidence, or not feeling shameful about eating, or being really obsessive about it, or overly tracking, or being overly obsessed with tracking. And so I had a couple of these ideas in mind because I also have years of health coaching where I've seen this behavior as well. You are too tightly bound to your weight or the baggage of your weight when you see the scale go down by a pound and then spiral so much that you gain 40 pounds. Okay, so like we're talking about unhealthy attachment and unhealthy attachment to our weight goal and like the perceived value that will come with that height. So I actually wanted to look up what an actual definition is medically. And situations, extremely rigid and unhealthy food and exercise regime, feelings of guilt and shame when unable to maintain food and exercise habits, preoccupation with food, body, and exercise that causes distress and has a negative impact on quality of life, given period of our lives, use of compensatory measures, fasting, and even purging or laxative to use to make up for food that you've consumed and then feel guilty about. So I want to cover some of these topics because from the outside, if you don't follow keto and understand how it works, you might think that some of the parts of keto actually fall in some of this disordered eating. And if you have a history of any of these behaviors, I think that being free of carbohydrates is one of the most peaceful things that I've ever experienced because I'm totally carb addicted. And I love being in the world, being surrounded by carbs every single minute and not really wanting any of it. Like, it's pretty amazing. It's the gold. So I find a ton of freedom from all of these things doing keto. But a lot of people will look at Instagram or my Facebook and say, oh my God, she tracks so much, or she's fasting, which means she's starving herself, or all these things, and they're thinking it's coming from an emotional, unhealthy place. When really this is like, I don't look at my keto lifestyle. This is about having the right keto mindset on, right? My keto lifestyle isn't about just losing weight. What I'm fascinated with is why my body lets go of the weight from keto. So like, why does it do that? How does keto clean my cells? How does keto prevent cancer? How does keto lower inflammation? Like, I know as a PCOS girl that inflammation is a huge issue. So I love that my keto diet reduces inflammation significantly and therefore makes my hormones back in balance and lets some of the weight go. So I'm fascinated with a lot of different aspects of keto. It's not just about a quick drop the pounds, don't care to do holistically keto as a brand is because of body health, right? So a mindset with keto is have patience with yourself. If you tend to get really upset if you lose weight and then you gain a little bit back and then you lose more weight and if you lose it, if you tend to spiral, just have a lot of patience with yourself because that's going to happen. That's everybody's journey. Anybody who's ever lost weight or had to work on their health has some major setbacks. Even today, I got an update on some of my testosterone numbers from my doctor, and my free testosterone dropped significantly since 90 days. So my free testosterone dropped and is now in range, which I'm super pumped about, and I'm going to continue working to get it in the median, not just the top of the range, but the median. But then for some reason, my total testosterone went up a little bit. So it's just like, okay, I'm still working on it, but I don't spiral from that little bit of a nudge in the wrong direction. The free testosterone going down is still a huge win, right? So you have to keep an eye on all of the benefits you get from the keto diet, not just the number on the scale, because that will really trip people up. Something else in terms of disordered eating is don't say to yourself, oh, I'm going to try keto and see if it works for me. Commit to it as a lifestyle because you know it brings overall health, and that will prevent the yo-yo dieting kind of aspect, all right? Fasting. I understand on spec, and this is where I want this to be more of a conversation. I'd love to know what you guys think. Like, from the outside, fasting on keto looks pretty much like anorexia, don't you think? I mean, 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, if someone next to me was working on their health and fasting, I would think, wow, that's so extreme. She's like totally starving herself and whatever. But a lot of people in your life don't know what fasting on keto is like, which is actually all you're doing is turning your body onto its own fat stores while you're in a non-feeding window of time. And actually, I've had the most energy, the best sleep, the most weight loss. I'm not tired at all during the day, whereas when I eat frequently, even when it's keto food, I am more sluggish and a little bit tired during the day, even if it's just a pure fat meal or whatever, I do slow down, and I don't do that on fasting. I love how I feel on fasting, and I'm not at all deprivating my body. I'm eating all my calories at once. So I'm getting all my calories in every single day, but I'm still fasting. So I want people to know the clear difference between fasting in order to emotionally control something and therefore not put calories in your body and actually starve, versus a nutrient-dense, full calorie version of ketogenic fasting, which can actually do worlds of good with your body. Compulsive or emotionally driven eating, I think every single woman under the sun, and men too, men love to eat when they're stressed. And women especially, the only time I really struggle still with carbs is when I'm split and I want like the real thing. I don't want to come up with a keto alternative. I do, but I still want it. And I really assess, and I sit there and I'm like, okay, I really want this thing, but it's totally, I serve myself. How can I get self-care? How can I serve myself in another way that means I'm not going to break my ketosis or eat junk food to try to make myself feel better right away? I mean, I'm sorry, if you're a woman and you can't relate at all to emotional eating, then you are some special gifted goddess, because I don't understand. Like, I think all women have this. Like, if we're using this definition of disordered eating, like probably 98% of us have experienced disordered eating, right? Like, I love the ceremony of food. I love eating out. I love being served dinner, right? I love all those things about food, and you can still absolutely 100% do that on keto. And I love the emotional, impacts of being taken out to dinner, right? So like, you can enjoy all those things. What you don't want to do is make a choice that you feel shameful or guilty about after the fact, and making a choice that's going to physically make you feel not good later. Like, how many of you have ever made an emotional eating choice that is like, this isn't gonna make me feel great, but I'm gonna do it anyway, and like halfway through that pizza you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so full, I'm so bloated, I'm so uncomfortable, wheat doesn't really agree with me, and then the next day, like, maybe your digestive tract is messed up, and so on and so forth. That would be a little bit of disordered eating. Doing something is not. And then obviously compensatory measures such as exercise, food restriction, fasting, and even purging or laxative to make up for food consumed. That's a little bit, you have to hold that on loosely too. How many people think, oh well, I went a little crazy last week, but I want to make extra exercises to the point where it's bad for your body, or that would be considered disordered eating. So I would love to continue this conversation. I think there's a lot of vulnerability here. So if you've ever struggled with carbs or and it could be really any food group specifically. I don't know anyone that's fat addicted. I love fat, but I don't crave it when I'm emotionally hurting the way I do with carbs, because carbs make your dopamine actually go crazy and actually does make us feel better. So you're actually not imagining it. If you are having like a hard day or grieving or a rough period day or whatever it is, and you're emotionally hurting or physically hurting, when you put carbs in your body, it actually does dump a lot of dopamine into your system and reduce pain. So we are medicating ourselves. It's just in an unhealthy way. So you're not crazy, and I think everybody does it. So if everyone falls into this category at some times in their life during disordered eating, I would love to know, do you have anxieties about it getting into your keto experience? If you've been in keto for a while, what have your experiences been? I would love to hear this from you guys. So this is more of a discussion today than anything. But thank you so much for your time, and here is to your holistically keto experience. If you have not yet joined the Facebook group, make sure you're in here with us, Holistically Keto, or follow me on Instagram at Holistically Keto, and I'm looking forward to all of your questions and comments. Thank you guys. Have a great night.